What if I told you that right now, as you're watching this video, something is looking back at you from the surface of the moon? Something that shouldn't be there. Something that has been watching us for decades, yet NASA refuses to talk about it publicly. For over 50 years, astronomers, amateur stargazers, and even space agencies have documented strange anomalies on the lunar surface. Objects that appear and disappear, structures that cast shadows in impossible directions, and most disturbing of all, movement, where there should be nothing but dead rock and ancient craters. I've spent the last 6 months diving deep into classified documents, interviewing former NASA employees, and analyzing thousands of lunar photographs that most people will never see. What I discovered will change how you look at that pale disk in our night sky forever. Because the evidence suggests we are not alone up there, and whatever is on the moon has been studying us far longer than we've been studying it. But before I reveal what's really happening on our closest celestial neighbor, let me tell you about the night that started it all. The night when a backyard astronomer in Arizona captured something so extraordinary that it would launch the biggest cover-up in space exploration history. It was March 15th, 1994. Jerry Patterson was doing what he did every clear night, scanning the lunar surface through his homemade telescope from his backyard in Flagstaff. Jerry wasn't a professional astronomer, just a retired mechanic with a passion for the stars and enough patience to spend hours documenting the same craters he'd photographed hundreds of times before. That night was different, though. As Jerry focused his lens on the Mare Imbrium, the Sea of Rains, something caught his attention. A glint of light where no light should exist. The moon has no atmosphere, no weather, nothing that could create random flashes of illumination. Yet there it was, pulsing rhythmically, like a beacon. Jerry quickly switched to his camera setup and began recording. For the next 47 minutes, he documented something that defied every law of lunar physics. The light wasn't just flashing randomly. It was moving, slowly, deliberately, tracing patterns across the ancient lava plains that formed the Mare Imbrium billions of years ago. But here's where the story gets truly bizarre. When Jerry developed his photographs the next morning, he discovered something his naked eye had missed during the observation. The light source wasn't alone. Surrounding it, barely visible even in his enhanced images, were geometric shapes, perfect rectangles and triangles arranged in formations that nature simply doesn't create. Jerry did exactly what any excited amateur astronomer would do. He sent his photographs to NASA, expecting them to share his enthusiasm for this groundbreaking discovery. Instead, he received a phone call that would haunt him for the rest of his life. The voice on the other end was polite but firm. They thanked Jerry for his submission and explained that what he had captured was simply a reflection from a satellite passing overhead. They assured him that his photographs showed nothing unusual and suggested he continue his valuable work, documenting more conventional lunar features. But Jerry wasn't convinced. He knew satellites and he knew reflections. What he had captured was neither. More importantly, he had kept copies of everything. Copies that would eventually make their way into the hands of researchers who weren't bound by government protocols and official explanations. This is where our story truly begins, because Jerry Patterson wasn't the first person to see something strange on the moon, and he certainly wasn't the last. In fact, as I dug deeper into this mystery, I discovered that reports of unusual lunar activity stretch back much further than anyone realizes. The earliest documented case I could find dates to 1787, when British astronomer Sir William Herschel reported seeing bright flashes of light emanating from the lunar surface. Herschel was no amateur. He had discovered Uranus and was considered one of the most respected astronomers of his era. Yet his reports of lunar anomalies were quickly dismissed by his contemporaries and eventually forgotten by history. Fast forward to 1969, and we encounter something even more intriguing. During the Apollo 11 mission, as Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin prepared for their historic moonwalk, Houston received a transmission that was never made public. According to leaked transcripts that surfaced decades later, the astronauts reported seeing lights on the rim of a nearby crater, lights that appeared to be artificial in origin. The official NASA response was immediate and decisive. The astronauts were instructed to continue with their mission and avoid any further discussion of unusual observations. The public never heard about these lights, and the astronauts themselves remained silent about what they saw for decades. But the Apollo 11 incident was just the beginning. As more missions reached the lunar surface, more strange reports began filtering back to Earth. Apollo 12 astronaut Pete Conrad reported seeing flashes of light that seemed to respond to their presence. Apollo 14's Edgar Mitchell described geometric patterns visible on the far side of the moon that didn't match any known geological formations. Each time, NASA provided reasonable explanations: reflected sunlight, optical illusions caused by the harsh contrast between lunar day and night, equipment malfunctions. The astronauts were tired, stressed, dealing with the overwhelming experience of being on another world. Yet these explanations began to fall apart when civilian observers started reporting the same phenomena. Throughout the 1970s and 1980s, amateur astronomers across the globe documented lights, movements, and structures on the lunar surface. Each report was met with official silence or dismissal, but the reports kept coming. The breakthrough came in 1994, not just with Jerry Patterson's photographs, but with the launch of the Clementine spacecraft. This joint mission between NASA and the Department of Defense was officially designed to test sensors and spacecraft components in the space environment while mapping the moon's surface. But Clementine discovered something that wasn't supposed to exist. Hidden in the mission data, buried beneath terabytes of legitimate scientific observations, were images that showed clear evidence of artificial structures on the lunar surface, geometric shapes that cast shadows inconsistent with natural rock formations, objects that appeared in some photographs but vanished in others taken just days later. The most compelling evidence came from the moon's far side, the hemisphere that always faces away from Earth. Here, free from the prying eyes of amateur astronomers, something had been building, expanding, creating a presence that grew larger with each passing year. Dr. Sarah Chen was part of the Clementine imaging team, and she was the first to notice the anomalies. As a planetary geologist with over 15 years of experience analyzing surface features on Mars and Venus, Sarah knew immediately that what she was seeing defied conventional explanation. The structures weren't random. They followed patterns, displayed symmetry, and most disturbing of all, they appeared to be growing. Comparison with earlier Apollo-era photographs showed that these formations had expanded significantly over the preceding decades. Sarah tried to bring her concerns to her superiors, but her reports were classified immediately. She was reassigned to a different project, and access to the Clementine data was restricted to a small group of researchers with the highest security clearances. But Sarah had made copies. Hidden away in her personal files were dozens of images that proved beyond doubt that something artificial existed on the moon. Something that had been there long before humans ever looked up at the night sky and dreamed of reaching the stars. The question wasn't whether something was there. The question was what it wanted, how long it had been watching us, and why our own government was so determined to keep its existence secret. The answer to those questions would come from an unexpected source. In 1998, a former NASA contractor named David Kellerman reached out to Sarah Chen through encrypted channels. David had worked on classified projects for over 20 years, projects that officially didn't exist and dealt with phenomena that challenged everything we thought we knew about our solar system. What David revealed would shake Sarah to her core. The structures she had discovered weren't new. They had been known about since the early days of the space program. In fact, the entire Apollo program had a secondary mission that was never disclosed to the public. While the world watched Neil Armstrong take his first steps on the lunar surface, a select group of scientists and military personnel were analyzing data from sensors specifically designed to monitor the mysterious installations on the far side. According to David, the installations weren't dormant. They were active, constantly changing, and most unsettling of all, they appeared to be studying Earth with the same intensity that we had been studying them. Every major event in human history over the past 50 years had coincided with increased activity from these lunar observers. The 1962 Cuban Missile Crisis saw a spike in energy readings from the far side installations. The 1969 moon landing triggered what David described as a flurry of movement and construction activity. The 1986 Chernobyl disaster was preceded by unusual light patterns that lasted for 3 weeks. Even the September 11th attacks were monitored by something on the moon that began transmitting signals hours before the first plane hit the towers. But perhaps the most disturbing revelation was what David called the response protocol. Since 1972, a joint task force comprising NASA, the Department of Defense, and several international space agencies had been developing contingency plans for what they termed direct contact scenarios. These weren't plans for meeting friendly extraterrestrial visitors. These were military strategies for dealing with a threat that had been watching us from just 384,400 kilometers away. Sarah wanted proof, and David delivered. Hidden in a safety deposit box in Nevada were photographs, documents, and recorded conversations that painted a picture of a decades-long cover-up that reached the highest levels of government. The evidence was overwhelming, but it came with a price. David made Sarah promise that she would never reveal his identity, and that she would be extremely careful about how she used the information. The reason for his caution became clear just 6 months later. Dr. Eugene Shoemaker, the renowned planetary scientist who had mapped impact craters across the solar system, died in a car accident in Australia. Officially, it was a tragic collision with a truck on a remote highway. Unofficially, according to David, Shoemaker had been preparing to go public with evidence of artificial structures on the moon. The pattern repeated itself with disturbing regularity. Researchers who got too close to the truth found themselves reassigned, discredited, or worse. Dr. Morris Jessup, who had been investigating anomalous lunar phenomena in the 1950s, was found dead in his car in 1959, an apparent suicide that many of his colleagues questioned. Professor James McDonald, who had been collecting reports of lunar anomalies from amateur astronomers, died under mysterious circumstances in 1971. But the most chilling case was that of astronaut Edgar Mitchell. The sixth man to walk on the moon had been increasingly vocal about his belief that humanity wasn't alone in the universe. Mitchell had hinted at possessing evidence that would revolutionize our understanding of our place in the cosmos. He died peacefully in his sleep in 2016, but not before leaving behind a collection of documents that would eventually find their way to independent researchers. These documents revealed the existence of Project Looking Glass, a classified program that had been monitoring lunar activity since 1963. The project's findings were startling. The installations on the moon weren't just observing Earth, they were responding to our technological development, growing larger and more complex as our own capabilities advanced. When we developed nuclear weapons, the lunar installations expanded their sensor arrays. When we launched our first satellites, they began transmitting signals toward Earth. When we connected the world through the Internet, they established what appeared to be their own communication network, spanning the entire far side of the moon. The implications were staggering. Whatever intelligence was operating from the lunar surface wasn't just watching us passively, it was adapting to our progress, possibly even influencing our development in ways we couldn't comprehend. This revelation led Sarah to a terrifying conclusion. The mysterious visitor on the moon wasn't just an observer, it was a guardian, a supervisor, or perhaps something even more sinister. The patterns David had shown her suggested that major technological leaps in human civilization coincided with periods of intense activity from the lunar installations. The development of the transistor in 1947 happened just months after multiple reports of unusual lights on the moon. The creation of the integrated circuit in 1958 followed a year of unprecedented lunar phenomena. The invention of the World Wide Web in 1989 came after a decade of steadily increasing activity from our celestial neighbor. Were these coincidences, or was humanity's technological progress being guided by an intelligence that had been watching us for centuries? Sarah began to suspect that our rapid advancement from primitive tool users to spacefaring beings in just a few thousand years wasn't entirely natural. The evidence suggested that we were part of an experiment, subjects in a study being conducted by beings with technology so advanced that they could remain hidden on a world we had visited multiple times. They had watched us develop agriculture, build civilizations, fight wars, and reach for the stars. And now, as we stood on the brink of becoming a truly spacefaring species ourselves, their interest in our activities had intensified dramatically. But Sarah's investigation was about to take an even darker turn. In 2003, she received a package with no return address. Inside were photographs taken by the Mars Global Surveyor, images that showed structures on the red planet that were eerily similar to those David had shown her from the moon. The visitor wasn't just on the moon. It was throughout our solar system, and it had been there far longer than anyone had imagined. The Mars connection changed everything Sarah thought she knew about our cosmic neighbors. These weren't random installations scattered across different worlds. They formed a network, a systematic observation grid that had been monitoring our solar system for millennia, and Earth sat right at the center of it all. As Sarah studied the Mars images, she noticed something that made her blood run cold. The structures on both worlds showed signs of recent construction activity. Whatever intelligence was behind this network wasn't just maintaining ancient installations. It was expanding, building new facilities, preparing for something. The timing couldn't be ignored. Humanity had just begun seriously discussing missions to Mars. Private companies were developing spacecraft capable of reaching the red planet. NASA was planning crewed missions for the 2030s. And now, just as we prepared to take our next giant leap into the cosmos, the mysterious observers were ramping up their activities on our intended destination. Sarah needed more evidence, and she found it in the most unlikely place. Dr. Michael Harrison, a radio astronomer working at the Arecibo Observatory had been detecting unusual signals coming from the direction of the moon for over a decade. The signals weren't random noise or natural phenomena. They followed complex mathematical patterns that suggested intelligent origin. Michael had tried repeatedly to get NASA's attention, but his reports were consistently buried under bureaucratic red tape. The official explanation was always the same: interference from Earth-based sources, equipment malfunction, or misinterpretation of natural radio emissions from deep space. But Michael knew better. He had isolated the signals, traced their origins, and confirmed that they were definitely coming from our natural satellite. More disturbing still, the signals intensified whenever Earth launched new satellites or conducted major space missions. It was as if something on the moon was monitoring our every move into space and reporting back to a larger network. The breakthrough came when Michael decided to analyze the signal patterns using artificial intelligence. The AI detected something human researchers had missed. The signals contained embedded information, data packets that resembled nothing in our current understanding of communication technology. When decoded using advanced mathematical algorithms, the signals revealed star charts, planetary data, and most shocking of all, detailed information about Earth's biosphere and human civilization. Someone, or something, was compiling a comprehensive database about our world, and they were transmitting that information across space using technology that made our most advanced communication systems look primitive by comparison. Sarah and Michael began working together, sharing their findings through encrypted channels while maintaining their day jobs and pretending to pursue conventional research. They knew that going public without overwhelming evidence would destroy their careers and possibly their lives. But they also knew that what they had discovered was too important to keep secret forever. Their investigation led them to Dr. Elena Vasquez, a former Soviet space program engineer who had been involved in early lunar missions during the Cold War. Elena revealed that both the Soviet Union and the United States had detected anomalous readings from the moon as early as 1957, just months after Sputnik's launch. Both superpowers had established secret programs to investigate these phenomena, but neither had been willing to share their findings with the other. According to Elena, the Soviet Luna program had a classified objective beyond its publicly stated goals of lunar exploration. Several unmanned probes had been specifically designed to investigate areas of the moon where unusual energy signatures had been detected. The results were so startling that they led to the establishment of a joint Soviet-American task force. In 1963, one of the few areas of cooperation during the height of the Cold War, the task force, operating under the code name Project Moonwatch, had been monitoring lunar activity for decades. They had documented the construction of new installations, the expansion of existing structures, and most importantly, they had detected what appeared to be mining operations in several lunar craters. Something was extracting materials from the moon, processing them, and using them to build an infrastructure that grew more sophisticated with each passing year. Elena showed Sarah and Michael classified photographs from the 1970s that revealed massive excavations on the far side of the moon. Geometric patterns carved into crater walls, straight lines and perfect circles that stretched for kilometers across the lunar surface. Evidence of industrial activity on a scale that dwarfed anything humans had ever accomplished on Earth. But perhaps the most disturbing discovery was the timeline. Analysis of shadows in photographs taken over several decades showed that the construction activity had accelerated dramatically since the 1990s. Whatever intelligence was behind these installations wasn't just maintaining them anymore. It was preparing for something big, and that preparation had intensified as human space technology advanced. The pattern became clear when Sarah mapped the construction timeline against major milestones in human space exploration. The International Space Station project coincided with a massive expansion of lunar facilities. The development of reusable rockets led to increased mining activity in several craters. The announcement of commercial space tourism triggered what appeared to be defensive preparations around key installation sites. It was as if our mysterious neighbors were getting ready for increased human presence in space, but not necessarily in a welcoming way. The installations showed characteristics of both research facilities and military bases, with structures that could serve as observation posts, communication centers, or launch platforms for vehicles capable of reaching Earth. This realization led Sarah to investigate something that had been bothering her since she first saw the Clementine images. The installations weren't randomly distributed across the lunar surface. They followed a specific pattern, one that provided optimal coverage for monitoring Earth while maintaining defensive positions against potential threats from deeper space. Working with Michael's radio astronomy data and Elena's historical photographs, Sarah created a comprehensive map of the lunar network. The results were chilling. The installations formed a perfect surveillance grid that could monitor every square kilometer of Earth's surface simultaneously. No human activity, no matter how remote or secret, could escape observation from this network. But the network's capabilities extended far beyond simple observation. Michael's signal analysis revealed that the installations were equipped with powerful transmitters capable of sending information across interstellar distances. Earth wasn't just being watched by local observers. Our entire civilization was being documented and reported to intelligences that might be thousands of light years away. The implications were staggering. Humanity had developed under constant surveillance, our every achievement and failure recorded and transmitted to unknown recipients across the galaxy. We had never been alone, and we had never been free to develop without outside observation. Sarah began to understand why the cover-up was so extensive and so ruthlessly maintained. The truth wouldn't just challenge our understanding of our place in the universe. It would shatter the fundamental assumptions upon which human civilization was built. Every religion, every philosophy, every political system was based on the idea that humanity was either alone in the universe or at least developing independently. The reality was far more complex and far more disturbing. We were specimens in a cosmic laboratory, subjects in an experiment that had been running for millennia. Our observers had the technology to remain hidden while documenting our every move, and they had been patient enough to watch our entire recorded history unfold while remaining in the shadows. But their patience appeared to be running out. The accelerating construction activity on the moon suggested that whatever phase of the experiment we represented was nearing its conclusion. The question that kept Sarah awake at night was simple. What happened to specimens when the experiment was over? The answer might lie in the one piece of evidence that all three researchers had been reluctant to discuss. Hidden in the deepest classified files were reports of human abductions that correlated directly with periods of increased lunar activity. People who disappeared without a trace during times when the moon installations were at their most active. Individuals who vanished near areas where unusual lights had been reported in the sky. Most disturbing of all were the few cases where people had returned. These individuals described experiences that sounded like medical examinations conducted by beings with advanced technology. They spoke of being studied, tested, and then released with their memories partially erased. But some memories remained, fragments of experiences that painted a picture of systematic biological sampling of the human population. The pattern suggested that our observers weren't just watching us from a distance. They were conducting regular close-up examinations of human beings, possibly to monitor our biological and psychological development. We weren't just being observed, we were being actively studied like laboratory animals, with some of us being selected for more detailed analysis. Sarah realized that the lunar installations represented only the visible portion of a much larger operation. The real research was being conducted in facilities we couldn't see, using subjects we couldn't track, by intelligences whose motives remained completely unknown. The moon was just the observation post, the command center for an investigation that had been penetrating human society for generations. But why reveal this to her? Why allow researchers like David and Elena to leak information about the cover-up? Sarah began to suspect that the disclosure wasn't accidental. Someone or something wanted the truth to come out, but in a controlled manner that wouldn't cause mass panic or social collapse. Perhaps the experiment was entering a new phase, one that required human awareness of our true situation. Maybe our observers had decided that we were ready for the next level of contact, or perhaps they needed our cooperation for whatever came next in their long-term study of our species. The evidence suggested that we were approaching a critical juncture in human history, a moment when our relationship with our cosmic observers would fundamentally change. The question was whether that change would represent an opportunity for advancement or a threat to our survival as an independent species. As Sarah continued her research, she couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. The lunar installations were preparing for something, and whatever that something was, it would happen soon. Humanity stood at the threshold of a revelation that would change everything we thought we knew about ourselves and our place in the universe. The mysterious visitor on the moon was no longer content to simply watch and wait. After millennia of patient observation, it was finally ready to make its presence known. So there you have it. The evidence I've presented tonight isn't speculation or conspiracy theory. It's documented fact buried beneath decades of official denials and classified documents. The geometric structures photographed by Clementine. The radio signals detected by Michael Harrison. The construction timeline that perfectly matches our technological advancement. The testimonies of researchers who risked everything to reveal the truth. Right now, as you're watching this video, something is indeed looking back at you from the lunar surface. Something that has been cataloging our every move, documenting our development, and preparing for what comes next in humanity's story. We are not alone, and we never have been. The question isn't whether this mysterious visitor exists. The evidence is overwhelming. The question is what we do with this knowledge. Do we continue to pretend that we're developing in isolation? Or do we finally acknowledge that our cosmic neighbors have been part of our story from the very beginning? Whatever happens next, one thing is certain. The age of secrets is coming to an end. The installations on the moon are expanding, the signals are intensifying, and our observers are preparing for something that will fundamentally change our relationship with the cosmos. The next time you look up at that pale disk in our night sky, remember that something is looking back. And after millennia of patient watching, it might finally be ready to introduce itself. The truth has been hidden long enough. Now you know what's really out there, waiting in the shadows of our closest celestial neighbor. The only question left is, are we ready for what comes next?